everyone. Welcome to the Q&A Cafe. We're here today at the Georgetown Club in beautiful Georgetown. And with our guest, Scott Altman, we're going to tell you all about him. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here with us and you watching at home and on YouTube. Scott, I'm going to have you do your whole resume, well, in parts and pieces, but the interesting thing is we have a mechanic in common.
Oh.
Bobby, dear Bobby.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned to Bobby that I'm going to be interviewing. I said, I'm interviewing an astronaut tomorrow. And he said, well, what astronaut? I said, Scott Altman. He's an astronaut? He said, he's been my client for 2 or 3 years and he's never mentioned that.
Well, I'm bringing him a car to get fixed, so I never kind of came up.
But you know, there are a lot, I know, it's just interesting that there are a lot of people who know you here in Georgetown, because you live here in Georgetown,
I do.
And they don't know that you were an astronaut. Is that just because you're uncomfortable bringing it up, or you put it so completely behind you, or you know how they're going to react the moment you say it?
I would just say it's still a big part of me. I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't want to inundate anybody with stuff. So once there's an interest, I'm happy to tell my stories as much as they can handle.
I should say that when Scott and I first met, I did not know he was an astronaut. And we were at dinner, and I'm a space geek, serious space geek. So it's true, the moment he said he was an astronaut, everybody else at the table just had to listen to me talk to you for an hour because I had 1,000 questions. But
well, you've got a great space background yourself.
And I don't mind mentioning it. I was very fortunate to have been, I'm old enough to clearly remember the moon landing, but I was at the Cape for the launch of Apollo 11.
Oh,
I was there for the launch of Apollo 13. I got to interview in my journalism career Alan Shepard, Wally Schirra. I met John Young. I mean, you know, I know Cocoa Beach. I know Moe's Satellite Lounge and the Tassel Tossers. I have serious background. But, you know, you represent the modern era of space. Is that how they refer to it, I would think?
Well, I guess it's going to be interesting now that the shuttle's retired, how it's the shuttle era.
Oh, that could be the shuttle era.
Yeah, and next we're going to go on back to the moon and Mars in the future. So I think the younger kids today, I've told them already, I'm a little jealous of them because they're the ones that are going to have the chance to really go somewhere.
And you're still so young.
Thank you.
And who knows, you could go to space again, you don't know.
Well, I would sign up for it.
So you
I would have to sneak out of the house because my wife's not as big a fan.
Take her with you. But let's go back a little bit because I think that it's very interesting to people, especially if they think they might want to go into the space program, to know how you get from A to B to C to D. So not giving anything away, I think you were interested in flight from the time you were a little boy, right?
A very little boy. I have a story that I remember, my parents remember, sitting on the floor watching an old TV, a TV show called Sky King.
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, it had a guy in it who flew around. He had a niece named Penny. So I turned to my mom and dad and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I want to be a pilot. And I'll name my daughter Penny, just like the guy in the show. I had all boys, so I never had to make good on that. But,
well, grandchildren.
Yeah, there's future.
And how do you get from having that childhood dream to making it a reality? I mean, did it stick with you? Did you have an interest in science through grade school and high school?
Actually, up until the 4th grade, I was not a great student. My parents were both teachers, and I think it was a frustration for them. I remember my dad saying he didn't think I'd ever learn to read. I'd look at a word and say the totally wrong one. But I had a great teacher in 4th grade, Mrs. Troyan. I kind of turned me around. I got straight A's from that point on. Excited about science, always pretty good at math. Loved physics in high school. But the dream of flying was always with me, although to wind up as a pilot, it didn't go smooth and easy.
And you were thinking of being a pilot. You weren't thinking of being a rocket man. You were thinking of flying, I assume, jets. And probably really fast jets.
Exactly right. Actually, I used to read, when I was a kid, comic books about World War II fighter aviation. And my real dream was to become a World War II fighter pilot. But given this was the middle 60s, to do that, first thing you have to do is invent a time machine. And that I never got to that.
So you say that it was a rough go to become a pilot. How so?
So I grew up in central Illinois, small town, pretty far away from the ocean. So the Navy didn't really occur to me. So I'm growing up, I'm thinking, I want to be a pilot. Where's the best place to go? Air Force. So I started writing my congressman. I got an appointment to the Air Force Academy in the end. And I thought, my dreams are all coming true. This is going along great, until I took the physical. And they said, your eyes are fine, everything else is fine, but you're too tall. Sitting down, my sitting height was 39.5 inches,
so
and their
that,
max
6'3"?
was, I'm 6'4", with a long torso.
Okay.
And their limit was 38.5.
Which is what, 5'8", 5'9"?
No, you could be 6'3" and have 38.5. You just have to have longer legs, which was my problem playing basketball.
Yeah.
When I was a freshman, my coach said, that Altman kid, he's 6'1". When he jumps, he's 6'2". So.
But so what you're saying is you can be tall, you just have to be tall a certain way.
In the right proportion.
You have to have a configuration that works.
It's a configuration issue.
Okay, all right. So
you
didn't have the right configuration for the Air Force.
So they said, come on out to the Air Force Academy, but you can't fly. And I'm thinking, okay, great, missile officer in South Dakota.
That's a deal breaker.
Not exactly what I had in mind.
Right.
So I went to University of Illinois, studied engineering, and because I was in engineering, my whole career is a sequence of little miracles, I think. I got a postcard from Admiral Rickover saying, would you be interested in nuclear engineering with the Navy? By then, I'd figured out the Navy actually had airplanes, so I sent it back. No, not interested, but send me some pictures of airplanes. And they did. They sent me a little book about how to get into naval aviation. I'm flipping through it, and it says, sitting height standard, up to 41 inches. I was like, hey, here's another way to go where I want to go. So that got me into the Navy, and I started off another movie, Officer and a Gentleman. Some people remember that.
I do.
Richard Gere. And that was the boot camp that I went through with Marines. The only thing I say they got it wrong in the movie.
Did you meet Deborah Winger?
She was not quite around, although there were some Deborah Winger stand-ins.
Yeah, right.
But the movie, I think, had the drill instructors playing too nice compared to what I went through.
Did you know you would be a test pilot, or did you just want to be a pilot?
Wanted to be a fighter pilot, fly the fastest, best aircraft. I got lucky and got selected into F-14s. And then while I was at F-14, I was like, hey, the next thing that would be pretty cool to go to test pilot school.
So being a fighter pilot is a gateway to being a test pilot.
It is. You have to have about 1,000 hours before you can apply to test pilot school.
Oh, I would think they'd go and let you risk your life as a test pilot, and if you make that, then you can, but it's the other way around.
Yeah, they think it's a little harder as a test pilot to evaluate aircraft. You have to have some experience so you know what you're doing before you.
So as a fighter pilot, you were flying F-14s. How do you prepare for that? I mean, that's not like just driving a Volkswagen.
No, it's a complicated aircraft, and there's a lot of things. Getting ready for it, again, a series of things. You start off in a relatively simple aircraft in primary training. You learn the basics of flying, advance to jets. Actually, that's the first selection point.
Yeah.
You get grades, and they say, okay, are you going jets, are you going props, or are you going helos?
No props.
Yeah, so I always wanted jets.
Do you remember the first time you flew?
Oh, definitely.
And did somebody hand you the controls? And what did you feel? I mean, I know it's all about training. I mean, I know you're hyper trained, but even so.
But I'll never forget that first time in an airplane, sitting there in the left seat. You run the engines up, you let go of the brakes, and you're rolling down the runway. And I've got the controls in my hand, and you pull back, and that rumbling, all of a sudden you feel yourself lift off into the air, and you're like, wow.
Nothing can prepare you for that.
Yeah, we're flying. It's so awesome. And I feel that way almost every time I'm in an airplane and I pull back on the stick and we leave the ground. It's an incredible thrill.
In an F-14, are you alone, or do you have somebody behind you?
F-14s always fly with a RIO, a radar intercept officer, in the back. So it's always
But did you
two
like
people.
that? I mean, do you like having somebody else?
I loved it in the F-14. I thought it made us a better platform for executing the mission because there's two people instead of just one. And you can get fixated as a pilot, especially when you're trying to roll in on somebody. You're looking right there.
God.
And the backseater's job is to not look at what I'm doing, but to look at what everybody else is doing.
So you saw combat.
So I was over at Desert Storm,
right?
Iraq, yeah.
And the first time you go into combat, again, you're trained, but what's it like? I mean,
it's again another little exhilaration. It's like when I was playing sports, you practice in the preparation preseason, and then eventually, they blow the whistle, it's tip off, and you're playing the game.
Yeah.
I felt like I'd been practicing in the F-14 for so long, it was nice to get in the game.
And who were you fighting?
So there were a few Iraqis that flew at the time.
And what were they in? Were they in comparable aircraft, or did you?
The F-14 was a significantly better aircraft with significantly better pilots.
Right. So. And where were they getting their aircraft from?
Mostly Russian.
Russian.
Yeah,
and
Russian MiGs.
And did you shoot people down?
No, we never. They would come out, but they always turned away before they came to the merge.
Because you were so. And this was all off of aircraft carriers?
Flying on aircraft
So
carriers.
you also, in addition to learning how to fly, you had to learn how to take off and land on the deck of a boat.
So aircraft carrier ops can be an awful lot of fun, and they can be incredibly scary.
Oh my God,
But,
I can't even imagine that first time.
It's exhilarating sitting on the deck of the ship. You're standing still basically, run your engines up, the CAT officer signals, touches the deck, and boom!
A slingshot, basically.
Exactly. 2 seconds from 0 to 150 miles an hour.
And do you feel you have any control at that moment?
You really don't for the first 2 seconds.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get, you got to wake up and take the controls and start flying.
And then in reverse, when you're coming in, you've got to get caught on a little rubber band, right?
Yeah. The arresting gear. Pretty small. There's 4 wires. You always try to catch the 3rd wire because that meant you put your hook down right in the middle of the wires. So, and we have what I used to affectionately call the Russian judges on the side, the landing signal officers who grade every pass. You come in and you're flying. You have a meatball that gives you glide slope, line up, and angle of attack. So it's meatball, line up, angle of attack, and it's just sort of like a triumph of the will. I'm going to keep all those things right on target, meatball, line up, angle, until wham, I hit the deck and I stop, or if I don't, I put the power up and we go around and I do it again.
How much wiggle room do you have? You say if you don't, you put the power up and you take off again. Is that like you have 15% opportunity of I mean, if you miss getting caught, the little thingy that catches you.
Yeah.
Explain to me what options you have of making it back up into the air or not making it back up into the air.
So because the Navy switched to the angled...
You can see how well I speak on jet aviation, but...
So the great idea that the Navy had after World War II was to go to an angled deck so that you can actually take off. In World War II, it was a straight deck, and you had all these airplanes parked up there, and if you missed the wires, you had a crash into everybody else.
Yeah.
So with an angled deck, if you miss the wires long, or your hook doesn't engage a wire, you have enough runway to add the power and take off again. So every time you touch down, you immediately go to full power. Most of the time, you stop in the wires and rock back, even though you're at full power, because the arresting gear can stop you more than your engines push. But if you miss, you got the power up and you just keep going like, oh great,
well,
I'm still flying.
Well, so you've got a little more grace than they used to have. Again, it's training. So how do you train for, do you start off training for that on an aircraft carrier, or is there a replication of it that's on the ground?
At every Navy base, they have a lens, the landing aid, next to the runway, so that every landing you come in, you can practice flying the ball to touchdown.
Okay, so
and when you're doing that, your zone of attention is pretty focused on the runway lineup and the ball, and then you have an angle of attack indicator.
How long do they let you train on an aircraft carrier? I mean, do they take a group of you out on an aircraft carrier purely for a training mission? How long does that last?
We did. Each jet aircraft I flew, from the T2 to the A4, we had to go out and carrier qualify. So you practice on land for about a month, going out and flying 10 approaches at a time. 10 practice landings turns your brain into a noodle.
Well, I was going to say, what is the adrenaline experience like when you get all those pilots together, after whatever runs they've been put through? I mean, how long does it take you to come back down to, just a normal blood flow?
That was the great thing at Miramar about having the club there, that after you came back and flew, you could go to the club and unwind a little bit.
And everybody was in the same frame of mind.
Yeah, a bunch of people like that, standing around in your flight suits, talking to each other.
So you do your time as a combat pilot, and then do you want to become a test pilot? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I saw that as a great blend of my aeronautical engineering background and my flying with the F-14.
But the risk has to be huge.
I see it as an opportunity versus a risk. I mean, to be able to fly different aircraft, because I went to test pilot school, I've now flown over 40-some different types of aircraft, which is any pilot's dream.
All of them with jet engines, or most of them with
Most of them with jets, but some props. Props are fun too.
Yeah, right, yeah. I'm sure for guys like you who like an F-14, oh no, I'll take the prop instead. Was Chuck Yeager somebody you knew about and admired?
Oh, read his autobiography.
Did you ever get to meet him?
I met him once or twice at a couple of events.
He's 98 now or something like that.
But he always kept his ticket punched so he could go back to the Air Force and get a ride in an F-15 once a year on the anniversary of his breaking the sound barrier. So
that's
smart
pretty cool.
man. I got to work out a deal like that.
No, I'm sure you can. So when you're a test pilot, you get told what you're going to fly, right?
You actually, are set up.
You qualify for certain things, but it's not like you can say, well, I just want to do this, or I just want to.
Mostly, I tested my fleet aircraft, but I wound up flying a bunch of other things, A7s, A4s. You use different airplanes to chase when you're doing events, so you put a guy next to the airplane while it does its maneuver so that a guy in the back can film it and see what happens. We did weapons separation on the F-14. So I'm in an actual poster doing a 60-degree dive bomb with 4 2,000-pounders coming off as we released. And a guy who was chasing me off to the side took the picture.
Any moments where you thought that you weren't so happy with the way this plane was flying, or that you had, moments of doubt?
The biggest night that I was concerned was actually before I went to test pilot school. I'm flying F-14s out of Miramar, and one of the things you would do as an exercise is go out and buzz a ship supersonic so they could practice their tracking in case a missile was coming at them. So we are about 200 miles off the coast. I do a supersonic pass right over this ship.
Is that like Mach 2?
Mach 1.3, a little over the number. We call it the speed of sound. It's called the number.
The number.
So you're a little over the number, and as I pull off, I come back out of afterburner, and all of a sudden, fire lights go off. And I'm like, ooh, this is not good. And then I get, it was an air source problem, and a friend of mine, a week before, had the exact same problem and had to eject. So I'm thinking, oh, great. I don't want to eject 200 miles out in the middle of the night and be swimming all evening. So we ran through some procedures and mostly got the fire out, but the controls were a little ginched up, and we headed back to base, and after another series of adventures, eventually landed, and life was better. Except I had to go to the hospital and get my blood tested to make sure I hadn't been drinking beforehand.
Oh, well.
I definitely drank afterward.
I was just going to say, yeah, get that test over with. Have you ever had to eject?
No, I've just come close that time, another time, and maybe 1 or 2 other times.
And is that something they can train you for too?
Well, we have a little seat that you go sit in and practice. You pull the handle and it jolts you up.
But it doesn't.
It's not really the same thing as an ejection.
Well, I'm glad you've never
I'm very glad to have the same number of landings as takeoffs.
And as I hope you always will. Was it during this time as a test pilot that you had the experience of portraying Tom Cruise in Top Gun?
It was actually before that.
Before that, so it was on your way to.
I was a fleet pilot in F-14s. So I told you I was learning to fly the F-14, and because I did pretty well in the F-14 carrier qualifying, they said, Scott, you're going to go to this squadron, which is leaving in a month. And I had met my wife. We were planning on getting married in the spring, but I found out I was going to be on cruise. So I said to Jill, do you want to get married now or wait until I get back when you have more time to plan?
Yeah.
And she said, let's go ahead and get married now. So we got married, and 13 days later, I went to sea for 7.5 months.
I think that's the life, though, isn't it?
It was. It makes the first year of marriage more stable when you're not there to ruin it.
But then you got to tell her at some point, but honey, I'm going to be in a movie.
We came back from that cruise, 7.5 months gone, and our squadron got selected to be in the movie. And I was happy to volunteer to be one of the pilots. Although I had to tell Jill, sorry, I have to go do this.
Yeah, this is right.
Skipper wants me to do it.
And you're like twice as tall as Tom Cruise, but we won't spill those beans.
The hardest thing was the fact that we didn't have form-fit helmets before then. The Navy got them later on. The Air Force had them ahead of us. But the word around Miramar was, if you get to fly in the movie, they'll make you a form-fit helmet. I'm like, this is great. I'll get a helmet out of the deal. Turned out they made Tom Cruise a form-fit helmet. And when I flew as him, I had to wear his helmet.
You got to wear.
And I have a lot bigger head than he does. So you're jamming this thing on.
I was just going to say, nothing was going to be done about that, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever take him up with you?
I did.
And how'd that go?
So Tom had a great attitude, actually. He listened when we told him things. He paid attention. We went out and we did these maneuvers to try and film, because we had cameras in the cockpit that filmed the actors.
What was that like?
It was different.
Yeah,
it's kind of cool.
Okay.
I had the switches to turn them on and off.
Okay.
And okay, here we go. We're going to do this.
So you were kind of directing Tom Cruise at the same time.
We got together. We briefed. We had a card that was given to us. These are the shots I want. They had all these storyboards set out. And it's okay. This is your part of the storyboard. So we did all those maneuvers. The other thing I tell people about Tom is he is somewhat vertically challenged. And third, although I've been asked not to repeat this anymore, he did fill his air sickness bag. But I didn't blame him.
Don't most amateurs, though?
A lot of folks did. Anthony Edwards didn't get sick on me.
Well, that's interesting. But I mean, I'm sure even seasoned pilots can get sick.
Oh, yeah.
It's just
you get used to it. The more you do it, the more you feel it.
So Tom goes up and it doesn't agree with him, basically?
Well, the true story is after a week, we flew almost all the actors, except for Val Kilmer, who refused to go. He said it wasn't worth the risk to his career. Which we kind of said, what? At that time, what career? So, anyway, my dig at Val. But then we're charging the Paramount $7,600 an hour for the airplanes, the time that we're in the air. And Tony Scott comes to me and says, you know what? We're not going to do this anymore. I'm like, why not? I think we're getting the shots. We're hitting the marks. He goes, yeah, but I'm looking at the dailies and I can't use it in the movie. The actors all look kind of green.
I bet. Well, you know what's interesting about that is, unrelated to being interviewed about that, I was in a situation where I heard John Glenn talking about the film. He had just seen it the night before.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember clearly, because it prompted me to go see it, he was telling this other person that it was the best aviation photography. He thought it was the most realistic replication of what it really felt like to be up flying one of those jets. So Tony, combination of you and Tony Scott, and I don't know how they got Tom Cruise into the shots, but...
Well, they did a great job editing it together, because you'd go and look at the dailies, and some of them looked kind of hokey to me.
Yeah.
But when you clip them into short things and go back and forth.
Movie magic, right?
The initial shot where Cougar's landing, as that's coming in, man, that gives me goosebumps because it makes me feel just like what it's like landing on a ship. Because you start out here, everybody's kind of calm, and then you get in here and then you can hear the voices going, and then you roll out in the wires, and I did trap. Oof. Relief.
I can't wait to go back and watch it, knowing. And also, there's a. I think you can tell this story on camera about the shot with the planes inverted over each other. Talk about that, because that will definitely make people go watch the movie.
So it's one thing a story I can tell. When you watch the movie, it's all edited together. It's hard to say
it's
that
movie
was
magic,
me.
Right.
Yeah, it's all. But in that shot, I can say it was, because if you watch the movie very carefully, there's a scene where an F-14 rolls inverted over an F-5.
And isn't that Tom Cruise who's rolling on top of the...
In the movie, it would be, yes.
Yes, okay. But
so you see the actual airplane, and it's kind of like this, but then they cut to a really tight shot.
Yeah.
And the canopies, that was the big problem, is getting everybody close enough to fit in the frame of the film. So to get the canopies that close, they had to film it sequentially. So I flew, they said, all right, you're Tom Cruise, you're inverted, act inverted. And I flew along like this, and a guy flew along next to me, and I said, okay, I'm inverted. But that's my finger in the movie as a result.
Giving the enemy fighter. But
keeping up relations, as Goose said.
So let's, because we don't have all the time in the world, and your career is so vast, but you're a fighter pilot, and then you're a test pilot, And is it your decision to go into the space program, or what had happened? What had happened with the space? Did it all of a sudden revive itself, and you thought, I want to go do that, or did they come to you?
So, you told a story about watching the moon landings, Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong actually was in the same fleet fighter squadron I started out in, VF-51, and I got to meet him later on. But
no, that's great.
When I was a kid watching the landings, they're on the TV, astronauts on the moon, and it wasn't until I went to test pilot school and we took a field trip to Houston that I realized two things. Astronauts are actually real people. I didn't think that was true before. I just thought they're up here, that's something unattainium.
Right.
But we took a tour, I talked to guys, and the second thing I realized, a lot of them had the preparatory career like mine.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, weren't the initial astronauts almost all test pilots?
They were all test pilots, almost all the way through Apollo. They had the scientists show up at the end of the program.
Very, I mean, in the early space program, you really didn't have to be an engineer or a scientist. You just had to be a daredevil, right?
Well, it helped to have some technical understanding.
Yes, but you really had to have, I can't say it on camera, but you had to have a big pair of those.
Yes.
And, so.
Well, it always helps.
It does help. No, I mean, I'm sure for you, training to be an astronaut, I'm sure there's a large part of the education is not just what you'd seen on TV, but going back and learning what it was really like. And you must have been in awe of what some of them went through.
I definitely was. And being down there, I was kind of starstruck when I was down there for my interview, and I'm seeing John Young, and he's giving us a brief, like, wow, John, this is so great.
Yeah.
Then I go to the clinic, and the nurses who have been taking care of John Young and all the other Apollo astronauts are like, oh, Scott, you were in Top Gun. Tell us all about that.
Oh, there you go. Well,
you got astronauts all the time. What do you want me to tell you about? But that was fun.
I mean, and just to think that they were just in this little capsule on top of a rocket. Have you ever gotten into one of those capsules?
Actually, that's one of my favorite memories is while we were working on designing the crew interface for the Orion, the next generation vehicle, I got to go over to Space Center Houston, and they opened up the Apollo 17 crew module, put a ladder up, and I got to climb up, get in, and sit where those guys had sat, look at their displays, and think about flying a vehicle like this to the moon. It was awesome.
Which was hardly flying, wasn't it? It was sort of just maneuvering. But what did that feel like? Did you think I could do this, or did you think I'm glad I don't have to do this?
Oh, I would have loved to have done it.
Really?
Oh,
well, but instead you got the New Era spacecraft, which was actually a rocket ship shaped sort of like a plane.
Yeah, the shuttle was a great vehicle. I loved flying every mission on it.
And is it flying? When does it become flying?
So on launch, you're basically a rocket getting thrown into space. You've got 8.5 minutes.
Kind of like that little slingshot shooting you off the deck.
It's very similar to a cat shot, except instead of lasting 2 seconds, it lasts 8.5 minutes.
And it's crazy, isn't it?
So the stack had the shuttle engines, but then 2 solid rocket boosters, each putting out about 3 million pounds of thrust. And those solids burn very rough. So when you first launch, the whole vehicle is like shaking like this. You sit in the simulator and it shakes a little bit. Oh, this is a realistic depiction of what it's going to be like. And then you're sitting there on the pad and the SRBs light off and you're like, whoa, this is not a simulator. This thing is rocking and rolling.
And you just have to believe that's what it's supposed to be doing, right?
So you have a bunch of things you do, and then at 2 minutes, the solids pop off and the ride really smooths out. But the G builds up until you're pulling 3 Gs, right until the end. When the engine shut off, it's called main engine cutoff, and you go from slammed back in your seat to floating. Instantaneous.
Instantaneous.
It's a wild transition.
And is that when you're taking control?
So you take control right after that base. You could hand fly the vehicle all the way up if you had to, but it's considered an off-nominal procedure.
You don't want to be doing
Don't want to be doing it. We had some emergencies on my last flight. Right at liftoff, we lost one of our flight control channels, and then we had a failure of a sensor on the helium.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about it is the failure we had looked just like the failures they would give you in the simulator that meant your engine was about to go.
Right.
So I'm talking to my PLT. You always discuss what's the next worst thing that can happen. I'm like, okay, if we lose that engine, we're going to do a return to launch site abort. And you say, okay, we'll do this, this, and that. And a return to launch site abort, you're going out and you're doing Mach 5 going away. To come back to land at Kennedy, you can't just make a big turn. You actually flip the orbiter around and fly backwards at Mach 5 through your own plume until you slow down enough and start coming back towards Cape. So it's a pretty wild maneuver, never been done, but I'm talking about it with my pilot, and my mission specialists on the middeck are hearing this discussion, and Drew told me that whole concept totally ruined his enjoyment of the launch sequence.
So your first flight was, your first of 4 was what year?
1998.
And so you were a considerable amount of time after Challenger, and it was basically the new shuttle program. And were you flying Columbia on that mission?
My first mission was on Columbia. Yeah.
So you flew Columbia twice and Atlantis twice.
Exactly.
And it was Columbia that, of course, was that 2003?
Yes.
Could that have been you?
Well, it was, to be honest, I kind of hate saying this, but it was supposed to be. Okay. Rick Husband was planned to fly his mission first, and then I was going to fly the Hubble mission after it. But because Hubble had some failing parts, they were worried it wouldn't last. So they said, okay, you fly here, and Rick will fly in your place.
Well, and in case everybody doesn't remember all the details, what happened was a foam piece had become damaged on liftoff. And NASA did not have the systems in place then. They could have had the Defense Department look at it. A decision was made not to. I mean, there were, you know,
it's a long, painful story.
It's a long, painful story, and we don't have time for it here. But it was possible. You could say it was an accident that perhaps didn't need to happen.
Oh, totally.
And under other circumstances, there might have been a plan that had they known there was this problem, they could have taken the shuttle to the space station, hooked it up, done repairs, or possibly even done a spacewalk. So it was a catastrophic event on any level, but it did cause a halt and a suspension in the program and reforms.
Right. And just as we did with Challenger before, I showed up at NASA at the 10-year anniversary of Challenger, and I have to tell you, I felt like we had everything suitcased at that point. They found the problem, everything's fixed, this is the safest thing going.
Yeah.
Flying off the ship, that's dangerous. Flying a shuttle, no problem. But then we found out, you know, you look back, there's a clear path, just like there was for Challenger, Columbia, same thing. Foam was coming off the stack and hitting the orbiter before it happened on STS-107. But we didn't pay attention to the right thing. Oh, it's just foam. How can that hurt you? Well, imagine a basketball hitting you at 200 miles an hour. It's going to hurt. Yeah. And the foam did that damage to the leading edge of the wing. We didn't have an ability to look and see what it was. We gave up the chance of using a telescope to look at it. And we thought, we did some math, and we thought everything would be fine. I personally feel a little bit guilty because I was on a board 2 flights before where they had a piece of foam come off from the same place, and it hit the edge of a solid rocket booster. And I said, could that have hit the orbiter? And they said, no, where it came off, there's no transfer path that it could hit the orbiter. The question I didn't ask is, what if it came off some other time?
Yeah.
And we all failed to ask that question.
A very chilling thing that I read, a very human part of this story. I mean, it is all human, of course, but with a lot of spacecraft involved too, but that there was a discussion of, and it's a philosophical discussion, do we tell the astronauts there's this problem and that they might not survive re-entry? Or do we tell them there's this problem and they just stay out there until they run out of air? Now you must have had to ask yourself what you would have wanted.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me because
they never told them anything.
They did. Well, they told them they were fine.
Yes,
that's what
basically.
We believed at the time.
Yeah.
That everything had been signed off and there wasn't going to be a problem. To be honest, I'm personally grateful that it worked out that way because I don't think there's anything that we could have done that would have gotten them home. Some people say maybe we could have come up with something and have some ideas. They didn't have the tools on board, the capability to do that. From the moment that foam hit them, they were doomed.
Well, things have been good since then. Were you the first mission after that?
We were the, not the first, but we were the only one that didn't go to the space station. Like you said, that's the idea. Launch, go to the station, see what the vehicle looks like. If everything's good, you can go home.
Yeah.
If not, somebody comes and gets you. But because you can't actually go to the station from Hubble orbit, we had to have another plan. So our plan was, actually we had defense in depth. Now we had an inspection system so I could look at the shuttle, even though I didn't have a station to help me look at it. I had a boom and an arm, and we could see the entire shuttle. So I could say, okay, is there any damage?
Like any pilot who looks at his
Yeah, you'd like to see what you have before you hang it out on there. We had a capability of doing some repair if we found damage.
Yeah.
And then the big question was, well, what if there's damage we can't repair? We had a plan where another shuttle was sitting on the pad, ready to launch within 7 days to come up, rendezvous with us.
Spacewalks.
And spacewalks back and forth over 3 days.
Have you done a spacewalk?
I never did a spacewalk. I trained for one in the pool.
I know. What is this, like this giant pool that you all jump into?
It's the size of 2 football fields, 50 feet deep, and it's where you can float on the ground without, feeling like you don't have gravity.
How long do they keep you in there?
It's a 6 to 8 hour
because they want
evolution.
to truly replicate what a spacewalk might be like.
And we're trying to practice every single technique that you're doing on that. Like working on Hubble, we had to choreograph everything because you knew you only had so much time and you had a list of things to do that was longer than. Charlie Bolden was actually my independent review team lead. And he's like, Scooter, you got to understand you can't get everything done. Don't be too upset when you guys fail. Be able to accept it. So I was really happy to come back and say, you know what, Charlie, we got it all done.
And you brought the Hubble telescope into the bay of your shuttle, right?
Right.
I mean, you took it out of orbit and worked on it and then put it back in space.
So that is the part that is actually hand flying as well.
Yeah.
As you get near to Hubble using some computers and stuff, but from about this point on, it's me at the controls, hand flying it, and rendezvous until we come up and just gently float right outside.
And how high up are you?
About 360 miles up.
But that's not its usual. It's usually higher up, right?
No, we go to it.
You went to it, and then did you put it right back where it was, or did it go?
We boosted it a little bit, and then we put it out.
Because it's got what? It's got what? How many more years?
So the sun has been pretty quiet. There's not as much drag as there could be if solar activity. So they think it's got another 10 to 15 years.
But you were the last visit.
We were the last people to get to go. So that added the pressure on every mission. They always say, don't worry, if you don't get it done, they'll do it the next time.
Pressure? What do you mean that's the only bit of pressure? You were also shooting an IMAX movie. I mean, you didn't have Tom Cruise up there with you, but you did have cameras.
Yeah, we did have cameras, yeah.
You had IMAX cameras.
Which is kind of a funny story because when they came to me and said, hey, we want to do IMAX on your movie, I thought, okay.
I'm a Hollywood veteran, sure.
We'll have a checklist. It'll say, turn on the camera here, turn it off. And I thought, no big deal. We can do that. Turns out it was a lot bigger deal than I thought. We had to basically pick the right lens that they wanted to shoot with, what focal length, pick the exposure, and then time the shot. We only had 8 minutes of film, and we were shooting at 30 seconds a pop. So you had to time everything. You knew you wanted to get this piece of action, but you've got these actors out there that you can't say, stop, I'm not ready yet, don't do that. Or you'd be going along, the lighting is great, you're all set, all right, open the door right now, and then boom, it's dark, and you can't shoot. So there was a lot more overhead doing the IMAX movie than I thought, but I was really happy at how well it came out.
Have you been to the space station?
I did. My second flight was to the station.
Did you spend a year there?
I could if I had to.
If you had to, but it's.
After spending 6 months, 7 months on cruise, it's kind of like going to the space station.
About the size of this room, right?
Yeah, station is actually the size right now of a 3-bedroom house.
Yeah.
So you got a little bit of room.
But you don't need to grow 2 inches, not at 6'4".
You're right.
A few kind of geek questions. What that first night, the first time you're in space and it's dark and you're looking at Earth, what's that like? I mean, nothing prepares you for that.
No, not really. I mean,
do you just stare? Do the newbies all just stop?
Window time is awesome when you can have that, because you're working so hard. But if you can snatch a few minutes to go to the window
and go, oh my God.
Yeah, we have this program called World Map that tells you where you are over the world, so you know kind of what you're looking at, because it can be hard to figure that out sometimes. And I'll never forget, on my first mission, we went it was a 16-day mission. It was flight day 15. Every time we flew over my hometown in Illinois, we'd either be in a bad attitude or I'd look out and clouds would completely cover the state. But on that last day, I'm floating up to the flight deck and I say, hey, we're going to go over St. Louis. I should look out the window. I'm like, oh my God, it's clear. Look at that. There it is.
Right.
That's where I grew up. That's where everybody I know is living. And grab the camera, like, wow. It was just a huge emotional experience to connect back with the Earth.
And that first time seeing Earth as Earth, too. Seeing it as a distant round ball. So
I'm looking at the horizon line, that first mission, and there's this bright blue band, but it's really thin. I'm like, what is that? And they go, dummy, that's the atmosphere. I'm like,
oh my
whoa,
God.
Look at the big Earth. That's the atmosphere? That's all we got?
Yeah.
Whoa. Gives you a new perspective on the planet. I just feel like it's more fragile than you really think, and that protective layer.
A lot of astronauts come back as big environmentalists.
I think that's true. It's easy to see.
The sleeping. How do you get so that you know when it's night or day for your body?
So everything is on a mission elapsed time clock, and you basically launch at noon. No matter what time of day it really is, that's going to be noon for you for the rest of your days.
Yeah.
So and you have a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes. So using the sun as your clock is not going to work. The funny thing is when you're getting ready to go to bed, you put these shades up on the window to block out the light. And a few times I was working, we were in the middle of a night pass, I get my bed all set up. I always slept on the flight deck near the controls in case anything happened. And it's dark outside, I'm putting the shades up. And then I go to put the last shade up and we come right into a sunrise. And you see the sun coming in, okay, I'm awake again. But
so is there a lot of sleep deprivation up there? You come home and you look forward to a bed?
Well, I like sleeping up there when you get to do it. The problem, especially with the Hubble mission, is you have your guys go outside. They're doing what's supposed to be a 6.5-hour spacewalk. Usually went 8 hours, so that's an hour and a half of your time you don't have anymore. Then you got to get them out of their suits, reconfigure everything, put that away, get the stuff out for tomorrow, configure all that, make them dinner so they have something to eat. And the next thing you know, you're 2 hours into your 8-hour sleep period and you haven't turned the lights out yet. So.
Did you see the movie Gravity?
I did.
Is space junk as frightening as it is in that movie?
I totally believe that's a realistic scenario.
Because you see a lot of junk up there, don't you?
Well, you don't see it, but you know it's there. I mean,
you might, when you see it, it might be too late.
Yes,
right?
if you see something, that's not good.
Right.
Because the velocity we're traveling at is 5 miles a second. So a little tiny piece of space junk can be 5 miles away. A second later, it has hit us. So you don't see it. You don't see the bullets. But we almost canceled my flight because there was an increase in the amount of space debris due to a Russian satellite hit an iridium satellite, and the Chinese shot down a satellite, and it raised the numbers so that the probability that we wouldn't come home got to be about 1 in 100.
Oh, well,
and NASA didn't like those odds.
No, and I'm sure you didn't either.
So we changed our mission around and spent time at different altitudes to try and increase that percentage.
We only have about a minute left, unfortunately, but I'm just curious, even though you consider yourself retired now, if you could go back into space, where would you want to go? Why, and what would you hope to find there?
Well, I will admit, when I joined NASA in '95, I wanted to go to Mars. I still do. But at that time, we were talking about a mission right around now. And I thought, well, I'll have been at NASA for 15 to 20 years by then. I'll be senior enough to write my name on the mission as the guy who gets to go. And by then, my wife won't notice if I'm out of the house for 2.5 years.
And what do you think you'd find? Do you think that,
to take humanity to another world is just incredible to me. To have another place for us to go, to start working our way out into this incredible universe. I always think Hubble is really the first step in exploration because it brings the universe to us. But I would like to travel along and start returning the favor and extending humanity's reach to distant places. And it would just be, it's going to be a huge honor. And I think somebody here today might be that first person who goes and steps foot on Mars. And I just realized, as much as I stood on the shoulders of giants like the Apollo crews that got me to where I am, hopefully we'll have laid the groundwork for them to do great things as we turn into a spacefaring world.
Oh, wow, that is a wonderful note on which to end. Thank you so much. This was fascinating. Thank you for watching. Thank you all for being here. And take care. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.